After doing a status report, they begin discussing whether or not to turn back until suddenly Tailwind gets shot out of the sky.
Go beyond! Plus!
Hey, what is up everyone? James here, and we are back with Transformers Shattered Glass. So real quick before we get into this video, I want to thank every single one of you who recently joined the channel. I woke up one day and was like, oh, we're at 2,000 plus subscribers. It's amazing, I just can't believe it. It's great. Again, thank you all so much. So I recently asked all of you if you wanted me to remaster my first series on Shattered Glass. A lot of you voted yes. I am going to do that, but I want to do it once this series ends. That way we'll have more Shattered Glass videos to look forward to, and we won't officially be done with the series just yet. But once those are done, I'm going to create a massive video of the entire series. I'm really excited about it. Shout out to J. Lou for commenting on what I had in mind. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's start this video. So the issue opens with Slicer visiting Ratchet at his new shop. I like this a lot because it answers the question, did Ratchet survive the attack on Gold City? The last time we saw him was in the first Shattered Glass series first issue, when Blur visited him, who, by the way, we learned in the previous issue, was secretly a wrecker the entire time. Now in that first issue, we learned Ratchet is suffering from some form of PTSD caused by the Autobots who died in battle that he couldn't save. So he spent his days in his shop in Gold City constantly fixing other bots, trying to keep them going. Slicer gives Ratchet's blaster's optics, which is messed up, but then again, someone using your head as a personal radio is worse. We learned from their discussion that Ratchet had to rush out of his shop when the attack on Gold City happened, and not wanting to leave anyone behind, he was forced to break down the bots he was working on, but unfortunately, they didn't survive reassembly. As their conversation progresses, there are two things I want to point out here that we learned from it. The first thing is Ratchet predicts Slicer is on schedule to lose an arm, and all I'll say is remember that. The second thing is whoever can guess where this arm Ratchet is currently holding is from, I'll pin your comment. I'll give you a hint. It's setting up something we'll see in this series, especially when Ratchet says it's part of an ever-growing list of work for Slicer and Ultra Magnus. Slicer mentions that he thought Ratchet would sound happier considering he gets to continue his work, and they're on the verge of victory. However, for Ratchet, it doesn't matter who wins or loses. To him, it's all the same. He'll be the only one picking up the pieces, trying to save bots. In all reality, Shattered Glass Ratchet isn't a bad guy. He's mostly just trying to save lives. Even when Slicer tries to reassure him that he won't need reassembling, Ratchet grimly says, I have yet to meet a bot who doesn't break that promise, but it's nice to pretend. From there, we go to Slicer traveling through the static zone, on his way to Metroplex. What's pretty cool here is we can see him passing by Blur's volcanic stone statue. In his inner monologue, he talks about how he's always held Ratchet in high regard, but their personal philosophies differ. Ratchet is stuck in the past, thinking he can bring it back if he works hard enough. When it comes to Slicer, he can't afford to hold on to the past, so he keeps driving forward because that keeps him alive. As he listens to Soundwave's radio frequency, he mentions how Soundwave and Ratchet are similar. They both are looking to the past. Soundwave wants to honor it, and Ratchet wants to resurrect it. He thinks that's why he keeps listening to it, because it reminds him of Ratchet. Slicer's philosophy isn't only about always moving forward, it's also about survival, because he says you can't change what's happened before. You never know who's going to win tomorrow's battle. You figure out who's the most powerful now and see what they need from you, and then you're good. What I found very interesting is Soundwave says in his radio frequency that he knows there are more Decepticons out there who are listening, but haven't reached out. I do believe there are more Decepticons out there, because when it comes to the Decepticon subgroups, we've only seen the Seekers and the Insecticons so far, and we will see another group in this issue soon. But my question is, where are the Constructicons, Combaticons, Mayhem Attack Squad, and Predacons, like the real heavy hitter groups? Are we to believe they all died in the Great War? I would understand it if that ends up being the case, because it just adds to the tragedy of their defeat, but I hope not. I would like to see at least one of these groups before the series ends. Once Slicer reaches Metroplex, he realizes the Titan has moved. It's not much, but it's worth noticing. He also sees Jetfire flying nearby. So Slicer's mission here is to find Goldbug and signal the Wreckers his location. He begins scouting by planting explosives within Metroplex, and then uses Blaster's head as a compass. How he can do this, especially in the static zone where it shouldn't be possible, is a combination of Blaster's build and Soundwave's radio frequency. The closer he gets to the source of the interference, the less he hears of Soundwave. After many dark hallways, Blaster's head eventually leads him to Starscream's spark. He knows that even if he needs to set off his explosives, the spark will survive because Jetfire mentioned to him many times in the past that it's indestructible. He hears this voice and realizes it's not coming from Blaster or Soundwave. Goldbug comes up behind him and tells him it's from Metroplex, that it repeats every few cycles. Now this showdown doesn't end up being an all-out brawl. Some of you probably thought that was gonna happen, but remember, Goldbug doesn't know Slicer is a double agent. However, Goldbug mentions to Slicer that he thought Jetfire took him out, or after Gold City fell, he thought he would return to his old job, which is working for Ultra Magnus. Remember, he's aware of this because as we learned in the first issue of this series, Goldbug was a part of the initial roster of Wreckers back when he was Bumblebee. Still playing the role of Goldbug's second in command, Slicer lies, saying he went underground for a while. Now we learned through their conversation the reason why Goldbug isn't stomping across conquering Cybertron with Metroplex is because he's constantly starting up and shutting down. He has no way of controlling it. Goldbug ends up hearing static, and Slicer reveals his Blaster Soundwave radio head. When Goldbug asks if he can turn it off, Slicer says he can't. He's lying, of course, because he'd rather hear the head than Goldbug, and he wants to annoy him. As they're both working on Metroplex, Slicer asks questions about his activations. Goldbug starts to become slightly suspicious, but then his temper gets the best of him as usual. He tells Slicer to get Blaster's head out of there before he punts it into space. When Slicer goes outside, he sends a signal to the Wreckers, but at the same time, Jetfire makes his move. As Jetfire flies towards him, the ground begins to shake beneath him. Metroplex activates and yells. Slicer, who usually is confident he'll come out on top since he's a Wrecker, the best of the best, this event brings fear even into his heart. He's set up many bombs, but he's beginning to doubt that they'll do anything. Jetfire stops in his tracks and flies away. When Metroplex eventually deactivates, Slicer realizes two things. First, he would have died and he wouldn't know what he was dying for. And the second thing is, the Titan deactivated when Jetfire fled. Once he returns to Goldbug, he demands to know how long Metroplex is awake when he is activated. Goldbug snaps at him and reminds Slicer he's still in charge. If you're wondering why Slicer doesn't just take out Goldbug already, it's because Ultra Magnus ordered him to stay in character for as long as he can, in order to squeeze out as many details as he can from Goldbug until the rest of the Wreckers arrive. At that moment, Blaster's head picks up Soundwave's radio, and when Soundwave mentions that he knows that the frontline patrols like to listen in, Slicer remembers that the Airstrike Patrol are in the area, and gets an idea. Now this is where the fun begins. Later, somewhere in the static zone, we go to the Airstrike Patrol. Suppose you're not familiar with them, just think of them as the Seeker's little brothers. After doing a status report, they begin discussing whether or not to turn back, until suddenly, Tailwind gets shot out of the sky. Slicer did this out in the open instead of the Wrecker's usual stealth approach because he plans to thin the numbers and get the Airstrike Patrol, Jetfire, and Goldbug to take each other out. I will say it is a bit weird. Jetfire and the Airstrike Patrol seem to not be working together. We aren't given an explanation as to why that is the case. What I think may have happened is after Jetfire and Megatron's argument about tracking down Goldbug in the previous issue, Jetfire ended up tracking him down alone when Megatron refused to spare resources in the endeavor, so Megatron sent the Airstrike Patrol after him. I think that's what makes the most sense. When we get to the end of this issue, I think you guys will agree with me. After Tailwind goes down, the Airstrike Patrol fires at Slicer and Goldbug. However, they don't realize they bit off more than they can chew. In just one shot, Slicer takes out Vesper and Goldbug takes out Nightflight. Goldbug decides to add insult to injury by getting on top of Nightflight's body and insulting him by calling him a little bug. He also says, "I'll do ya like I did blank." He doesn't finish the sentence. I think he was gonna say Skywarp, referring to the absolute beatdown he gave him back in issue 4 of the first series and ended up taking his head, Stormcloud tries to get the jump on Slicer, but he quickly dodges it and fires his shoulder launcher and obliterates Stormcloud. What I thought was funny here is while Nightflight is slowly dying, he groans and Goldbug says, "Shut up, you're dead." In the meantime, Slicer is waiting for Jetfire to make his move. And after Jetfire is out of the way, he plans to take out Goldbug next. He refuses to die at the hands of a failed wrecker, but out of nowhere Goldbug tackles him, calling him an overgrown patch of rust. Goldbug points his blaster at Slicer's head and reveals he always knew he was still loyal to Ultra Magnus. Goldbug is so distracted that he isn't listening to his surroundings. Jetfire takes advantage of this and viciously smashes him into the ground, literally squashing him like a bug, which seems to be the end of Goldbug. Slicer's plan here really was genius. He got Goldbug away from Metroplex, took out the Airstrike Patrol and Goldbug, and lured Jetfire to his position in order to test his theory, which is when Jetfire is close to Metroplex, he awakens. When Slicer mentions to Jetfire they're both traitors of Gold City, Jetfire pulls his blaster on him and says some bots deserve to be betrayed, and Slicer replies some deserve loyalty. In his inner monologue, he says it's a question he's often posed to himself, but never answered because his dangerous work keeps his mind occupied. He self-destructs his arm in order to create a distraction. Now, he's not sure if Ratchet was right about him losing his arm, or if Ratchet saying he'll lose his right arm inspired his stunt. He admires Jetfire because his purpose, his motive for revenge, has changed him into something stronger. As he puts it, Starscream's death brought him to life. When Jetfire is about to land a blow on Slicer, he is suddenly strung up by the rest of the wreckers who finally arrived. Once Jetfire is captured, Slicer believes Jetfire's mission of vengeance made him strong, but it also made him vulnerable. He was so focused on that and his past mistakes with Starscream that it blinded him. Despite that, Slicer wonders if any of the wreckers would fight this hard for him. When Drift is about to shoot Jetfire, Slicer stops him and tells him Magnus wants him alive to activate Metroplex. So Drift just ends up injuring Jetfire. In his inner monologue, Slicer mentions how he is proud of his work. The Autobots are winning, Ultra Magnus will get his Titan, and all his enemies, Autobot and Decepticon, will fall at his feet. What's interesting is Slicer questions himself. He poses the question that's almost like having a purpose, right? Though he's won the battle, the fight isn't over just yet, because when he looks into the distance, he sees a great host. He sees Flame War and her Decepticon crew approaching fast towards him and the Wreckers. That's the end of the issue. God, I enjoyed this issue a lot. I hope you guys did too. If you haven't already, join us in our journey of covering Transformers monstrosity right here. Other than that, hope all of you have a fantastic day, and always remember every day to transform and go beyond. See you later, Beyonders.